Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Mike Pedrick. He is the VP of Cybersecurity Consulting over at Newspire. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being here, Mike. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Sure. So, as you said, VP of Cybersecurity Consulting at a managed security services organization called Newspire, based in Michigan. I've been in consulting in one fashion or another for, 18 years and change at this point. I've been in the information technology space for a little over 20 years. Prior to that, I thought I wanted to be an architect. Turns out I don't think like an architect, so that wasn't the right place for me. So I moved into IT right about the time the dot-com boom burst. And so I missed out on the opportunity to get a six-figure salary just for being able to turn a computer on. But it's been a pretty good career so far.
Very cool. Any highlights you can think of throughout the years in your career so far, and especially maybe as it relates to hiring or talent and management?
Yeah, I would say, in broad terms, getting to work with a myriad of folks with varying degrees of, expertise in the field has been fantastic. I should point out that in addition to my role as a consultant, I'm also a frequent trainer. So I've been teaching, I'm accredited to teach 3 of ISACA's certification programs. I've also taught some of ISC Squared's content over the years. And I do my level best because it's how I want to be led. I do my level best in a management and leadership role to treat those relationships as this is an opportunity for me to make people better. It's a mentorship opportunity. It's an opportunity to be a part of the group as opposed to, just directing from on high, so to speak. I think I feel like I've done okay with that. Sometimes better than others. I will freely admit to early on in my career being a little bit arrogant in my 20s. And I learned pretty quickly that that's not the way to lead people. That's not the way to get people to, do what needs to be done in their mission. Certainly not a way to endear yourself to those folks. So I try to avoid that behavior as much as possible.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there is sometimes an issue with egos in the security field. I think security people kind of know they have to be pretty good at what they do to be a proper security person. You really need to understand technology on a deeper level than some folks might. And I think that's why some folks would make the argument that you really need to be a technologist before you come into the security industry, which I'm sure we can hit on at some point. But usually we talk about the talent gap starting off in the show and whether or not it's a real thing, and if so, what does it look like? So in your mind, do you believe the talent gap is real? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
I'm going to say, this might sound like an artful answer, but I'm going to say that there is a gap of some sort. But it depends on who you ask, right? From one side of the argument, you'll hear that, gosh, there just aren't enough qualified people on the market, that, there isn't enough people that understand technology well enough or understand the business well enough, or, we're just dealing with I want to be careful with this word. I don't want it to have more weight than intended, but we have an ignorant candidate base. And from the other side of the coin, you hear that, hey, hiring managers don't know really what they're looking for, or they've got lofty goals. They're asking for too much. They're trying to get, way too much out of an individual. They're looking for a unicorn and giving them, pennies in terms of salary. And so they're not finding anything, and candidates aren't finding anything. And, the two sides are not finding each other. So there's a gap of some sort. I think that, the statistically speaking, neither side is 100% correct, but neither side is 100% incorrect either. So, it'll be interesting to see in the coming years, does this level off, or is this always going to be an issue? Candidly, I think that there's also a level of, I want to say, reticence on the part of candidates to really dig in and learn certain things. And here's what I mean about that. I'm not trying to throw candidates under the bus or technologists or anybody in our space. Quite the opposite, actually. But I think that when we encounter job descriptions that expect somebody to be an expert in a thing, sometimes they're ridiculous requirements, right? You must have 10 years of experience in a thing that's only been out for 3 years. A lot of candidates will just roll their eyes at that and say, well, I don't need to learn that, or I don't need to know that, or I don't know it as well as the description seems to imply I need to know it. And so I'm just going to move right on past this. When I think that, gosh, a little bit of research, there's no shortage of opportunities to learn today, whether it's YouTube or LinkedIn Learning or any other of the myriad of resources one could use to develop a skill. If that's what you want to do, and that's a company you want to work in, a little effort goes a tremendously long way in that space.
Yep, totally agree. And yeah, the way I see the problem is we have this vast untapped pool of potential out there at the entry level, and it's what I call a talent bottleneck. We have tens of thousands of people trying to break into the industry. They're caught at this bottleneck right at the entry level where they can't break in because there's not enough jobs. But then on the other side of that, we have this massive shortage in certain disciplines within security. It's not evenly distributed, and it's only certain skill sets, and it changes. So, for instance, a year ago, you couldn't have enough GRC people. And right now, we're recording this in late November of 2023. There's a glut of GRC people, and there's not enough jobs. All the consulting firms thought that the mad dash to get all these audits done would continue. They had no reason not to think that. And so they hired thinking that growth would continue. Then it didn't. The ride stopped and everybody had to find their seats. And it's just not happening right now. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. And then, like you said, you also have on the other side, the hiring managers having lofty expectations. And maybe they don't necessarily have a sense of what the market is like what candidates are actually out there, what skill sets they actually have, how many of these people are out there. I'll often conduct a search for an open position. And for something specific, like say an ISO lead auditor that's worked at a certification body, there's a handful of those people in the US, period. End of story. So if you're looking to hire one of those people, you better have a really good value proposition for that person. And you may have to flex a little bit on your requirements. If you can't get one of those few people because of, salary or whatever else, whatever other factor, maybe your benefits aren't great. Maybe candidates are just sick of the consulting lifestyle. You have to flex a little bit and maybe consider somebody from the internal side. And that's something that I've encountered more in the consulting world than anything else, is this sense that somebody needs to come from the exact same environment, from a direct competitor, have the same experience, same job title. They need to be doing the thing yesterday that they're going to be doing tomorrow at the new company. Is that something that you've encountered in your years of consulting?
It is. And in fact, I've got a relatively prescient story or relevant story to that. I interviewed with an organization, this was years ago, for a leadership role in an audit, on an audit team, an evaluation team. And I've spent years evaluating organizations, and I've developed a skill set for evaluating them against insert framework here, and can return that information back to the client in such a way as they can use that to improve their program, right? This is just a part of what consulting in this space requires. And what I found fascinating was I had a tremendously good experience with interviewing with multiple people throughout this process, and I had a really good feeling about joining this team. And then I met with somebody who was, I want to say, director level or whatever. This is a very large firm. I won't name them, but I met with this person, and he immediately said, I'm looking back through your resume, great experience as a consultant, fantastic, but I don't see anywhere that you've worked for an audit firm. And I said, well, I haven't worked for an audit firm by design, intentionally. I didn't want to get, gobbled up by a big firm and spend the entirety of my working life as a cog in a much larger machine. That was my plan, right? And he said, well, gosh, I don't know how it is you can be effective in audit if you don't have a background in audit. And I tried to explain, here's what I do. Maybe we're not clear, right? Here's what I do, and here's the process that I've gone through. And I even train auditors. I build auditors as a trainer for ISACA. And at the end of the day, obviously, I didn't get an offer. I didn't even get past that interview because that individual was stuck on the idea that I did not have one of the big four on my resume, or something along that line. And it was I don't hold anything against that individual. I understand that that's their requirement for hire, but gosh, does that feel short-sighted to me? And I've always committed myself that I'm not looking for a company. I'm not looking for a title. And there's one thing at the top of my list when I'm hiring somebody as a consultant, right? Can I put you in front of the client? That's not a list of credentials. That's not a list of, you've worked for, big tech organizations or audit firms in the past. That is, can you speak comfortably and competently to the client and present yourself in such a manner that that relationship is bolstered? Everything else after that is easy. We can talk through tech. You can learn tech. But if I can't put you in front of a client, apologies, but I can't use you, right? And I'm also of the strong opinion that if you have that list, if you have that criterion, I've got 10 things that I'm looking for in a candidate, and this person checks off 8 of those boxes, hire that person for sure. The last 2 boxes can get checked with a little bit of time. And if they can't, that's okay. You got to go back to the pool. No harm, no foul. But I would bet dollars to donuts you will find that 8 out of 10 person several times over before you find the 10 out of 10 person.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the idea of the Pareto principle, where you'll get 80% of your efforts through the first or results through the first 20% of your effort. So if you're spending all of your time on that remaining 80% effort to get 20% results, that's not a very efficient use of anybody's time in trying to eke out the last perfection, to find that unicorn. I think the talent gap, as I see it, all kind of boils down to open-minded versus narrow-minded hiring. You can really summarize it that way. Look for transferable skills. Look for somebody who's done something similar before, or somebody who can articulate, who can tell a story about how they did something similar and why they think they'd be a good fit for this role. If they're able to do that, what makes you think that they're not able to make that transition and figure things out very quickly?
Absolutely.
And like you said, if somebody meets at 8 out of 10, I would say that's extremely rare to meet 80% of a laundry list of requirements on these job descriptions. It's rare to find somebody with those. And the research has shown that women won't apply to jobs where they don't fit like 80% of the requirements. Whereas men they'll just kind of fire their resume at whatever and just kind of hope for the best. And, right now, especially with so many people flooding the market, we have people that were never on the market previously that are now on the market. So you get each job posting, they get thousands of applicants, and these recruiters are just getting inundated with all these applicants, and they're not very efficient in sorting through everybody. And if they're not really well trained, chances are they're going to miss somebody that's really good. So it's a much different market than it was a year ago. But yeah, I think to your point about having 8 out of 10, if you keep your must-have requirements to a very small list, your chances of getting somebody good they go up exponentially. Because if you focus on the 2 or 3 things maybe that person needs to have on day one, I actually just got off the phone with a client today, and I said, what does this person need on day one to be effective, and what are the other things that you can fill in the blanks later? And they gave me 2, 3 things. I was like, great. So I'll find you somebody with those 2, 3 things, and if they have the other things, great. And that broadens the candidate pool so much. Unless you're a recruiter, I think most people don't realize how small these candidate pools are when you start adding those 10, 15 requirements. I look at LinkedIn Recruiter all day, and when I look at that list of search results and I have to put more ands in my search string and my Boolean searches, each and narrows the search by maybe half on average, I would say. And if you narrow it down to 30 people and you know that you only get a, say, 20 to 30% response rate, that's not a lot of people. And then you got to hope one of those very few people actually responds and is interested. So I always say, recruiting is a numbers game. But at the same time, there's a qualitative aspect to it too. and obviously you've been in consulting for a long time. And I imagine a lot of what you look for is kind of intangible.
Mhm.
As a hiring manager, as somebody who's been in consulting for a while, what do you generally look for from like an intangibles qualitative perspective?
It's I'll start out by saying it's a difficult thing, but there's a famous quote. I think it was Orrin Hatch, Senator Orrin Hatch in the 90s, and he was talking about an entirely different subject, but I don't know how to describe it, but I know it when I see it, right? It's a confidence. It's that somebody can speak to somebody about a subject matter in a manner that is it fosters the dialogue. It encourages the dialogue between the two individuals. And I'm strongly of the opinion that a client is looking for, they're looking to you as an expert. If you're in a consulting or advisory capacity, they're looking to you to be an expert and to provide value for their dollar. They're paying you for your time. And so I always try to look for those folks who can present themselves in such a manner that there's a degree of emotional intelligence, there's a confidence to the way that they speak, but it's a hard line. It's hard to see it as you're sneaking up on it, but I don't like arrogance in a consulting capacity, and I don't like, I'll say, the presence of ego in the dialogue. Right? I'm always sensitive to the stereotype from the '90s, and probably throughout the process of like the old SNL skits where the IT guy comes out and he says, "Move, let me take care of it for you." Human beings are sensitive to that, and so I'm always looking for, are you short of that line? Awesome. We have a conversation. We have a dialogue. And again, I'll repeat, I strongly believe everything after that can be taught, can be mentored. And I'll put out there too that I just came out of an interview yesterday where the candidate actually asked that as a question. What does your organization do in terms of mentorship? Right? If I come in on day one, am I instantly on my own? Am I instantly operating without a net? Or is somebody going to, hold my hand a bit and teach me how to be successful in this role? I was really blown away. I thought that is a phenomenal question. We should have had an answer for that before it got asked, but I'm tremendously impressed that it got asked by the candidate. That's awesome. Instantly, 4 levels higher in my list. Like I didn't know if I was going to say yes before, but now I'm going to say yes for sure. So, again, as in a consulting capacity, I just need somebody who I can comfortably put in front of the client who isn't going to, damage that relationship. And I'm not looking for a salesperson, or I'm not looking for a used car salesperson, the stereotype of a salesperson. I'm looking for somebody who can endear themselves to the client and present themselves and the organization and the community, the industry that we represent, that they can represent themselves competently and confidently.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like there's security people or IT people on the client side may be extra sensitive to that that car salesman attitude or whatever it may be. I see a lot of examples of that on LinkedIn where people say, this sales guy just reached out to me. It was a cold call. He was doing X, Y, and Z thing, and it really annoyed me. Or are they really getting business this way? Why are they trying to pay me for my time and offer me mugs? I saw that one today. I guess this is kind of going off topic a little bit, but what do salespeople do when, or consultants do when they're coming up against would-be clients or clients that are so sensitive to that sort of thing? Like, how do you walk that line and make yourself presentable and gain that trust with that other person on the other side of the fence?
It's a fine line, and it's not a very hard one, right? One individual you interact with thinks that you're coming with a sales pitch the minute you opened your mouth, and the next person, it takes a little while before they realize that's coming. I will freely admit that I've been pretty vocal in the past about my disdain for traditional heavy-handed sales tactics. I'm not a fan of it. I don't like it. I don't like when I see it coming. I don't like cold contact. And I'm generally of the opinion that I'm not alone. Maybe I am. I'm an old guy shouting at clouds, but it's just not something that I want to, that's not how I want to conduct myself. That's not how I want my team to conduct themselves. So my approach with clients is always to foster that trust. You can trust me as an advisor. If I say something to you, I recommend something to you, it comes from a place of sincerity. It's not just an opportunity for me to land and expand with whatever army of services and service providers I have behind me. If I say you need a thing, it's because I think you need a thing. Buy it from us, buy it from somebody else, but please allow that I think that this needs to be a part of your program moving forward. And I try to be as upfront as possible about that. Say, I'm not here to sell you widgets. I'm not a salesperson. That's not my primary role. I have to sell. I have to sell in some capacity. Not just my own services, but also, like I said, if I need to make a recommendation to a client because they have a big blind spot or a big hole in their risk management program, I have to do something that looks and smells a lot like selling. But I always try to avoid that, arm over the shoulder. Let me show you this doozy over here. It's a Plymouth Horizon from 1984. But boy, is it clean. That's not my style.
I don't know if you've thought about this, but I guess looking back on previous client interactions you've had, is there a tactic, I guess, not that maybe you've thought about it, but to disarm or to overcome any, you seem like a salesman, objections before they happen? Like, how do you put a client at ease when you first walk into the room or, meet them on a Zoom call, would you say?
Try to be me. I try, being disarming, being charming. That's also a skill set. That somebody if somebody has it innately, you see it. Difficult to describe, easy to see, easy to observe. I try to treat every interaction with a client as though I'm talking to a friend or I'm talking to a person. Person first, not paycheck first, right? Or billing opportunity first. And I always fancy myself as I wouldn't survive in a sales role. My heart goes out to salespeople, especially earlier in their careers, because, compensation models being what they are, you have to hit the ground running and you got to sell the world to make a living. And that it's very easy to slip into some of those stereotypical tactics that we all sort of roll our eyes at. I wouldn't make it in sales, in a sales capacity, because I'm not willing to do those things. Full stop. So I'd be broke. I would not be eating well if I was in a pure sales capacity, I think. But so again, that honesty, like we're having a conversation, we're having a dialogue about a thing, and I'm happy to talk about a thing. I'm happy to unpack a concept or explain something or talk through a thing or offer my opinion about a thing. And the client can have the reasonable assurance that it's not going to immediately be followed up by, okay, so when can I sign you up for this newsletter or this service or, whatever the next thing is? Now that we've established a relationship, how can I wrest as much money as I can out of your pocket? That's not going to happen. I'm not going to take that step.
Yeah, and you mentioned emotional intelligence earlier too, and I think that's such a key aspect of being a consultant or being a recruiter or being a salesperson. Understanding when somebody is feeling a little bit uncomfortable, or just noticing the little mannerisms, facial expressions, and things like that. If somebody's feeling a little weirded out or something, that's a very finely tuned thing. I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that emotional intelligence, that perceptiveness, can that be taught, or do you think that's purely innate?
Another artful response: it can be taught. It's up to the individual as to whether or not it's received. Do you know what I mean? So there's a ton of documentation and instruction out there on reading body language, reading various tics that people have, and how to interpret what that means. Right? Crossed arms means a thing. When somebody looks up to the left as opposed to down and to the right, what does that typically mean? So on and so forth. All of that can be taught. It can be researched. It can be consumed. But the perception of the person in the room, that's entirely with them. And there's some subjectivity, right? If somebody crosses their arms and it's an intentional maneuver, it's a part of a negotiation process. That's more of an advanced skill. Do you recognize when somebody is doing a thing to get a response out of you, as opposed to, it's an involuntary process on their part?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've long been interested in human psychology and those little mannerisms and things like that. And I imagine probably the best salespeople, the best consultants out there, they just kind of notice some of these things and they react to them without ever really thinking about it. But yeah, like you said, I think it can be taught, or at least the theory of it can be taught. But
Mhm.
I don't think you can make somebody care about reacting to these certain things. If it's not their nature to want to care about these things. What?
There's an adaptability that you assume in that person as well, right? I
Mhm.
can recognize somebody's character, or somebody's behavior from across a room, and still not know in the instant exactly how to respond to it, right? What's the famous Mike Tyson quote, right? Everybody has a game plan until they get punched in the face. So you have a game plan going into this interaction with a client, prospective or current, and then their behavior causes you to deviate from that game plan. And again, that assumes that you recognize what it is. But how did your plan change? How are you going to change up your approach with that client? My goal, as always, is to make a client feel comfortable, make a client feel as though they're in a safe interaction, especially since the vast majority of the conversations I'm having with clients are about, hey, here's why your risk management program sucks, or here's why you're facing dramatic risk in this particular space. I'm always coming in with potentially bad news. I try to frame it, the sandwich method, here's what's really great, here's what's sort of not awesome at all, and here's what you're also doing well, or here's why I think we can improve relatively quickly. But if I'm in the room with the client and I think that I'm losing them, or what, actually, I had an instance where I delivered a posture assessment to a client. I spent a great deal amount of time with the organization and their, all of the various business process groups. It was a very large scale evaluation. Everything from, business process down to IT and information security and even compliance and governance. And as I was presenting my report, I could see the IT leader in the room uh, was starting to scowl. I mean, outright scowl. He was not happy in any way, shape, or form with what I was presenting. And I finally stopped and I said, I want to unpack some of this. A lot of this is relatively self-evident, but I'm getting the impression that you have concerns about this report. What can I help with? This is based on my findings. If I've missed something out, please let me know, and we'll adjust accordingly. And his response was something to the effect of, from where I sit, where he sat, our program is not that bad. We are not that bad. This report makes it sound like we are just trash. And I had to pause and reframe and say, well, no, hold on, a couple things. First of all, this is a snapshot in time. This is what I've found. Also, my perspective is based on meeting with all of these myriad people, and of course, you have to recognize that people are going to report. They're going to report the negatives much more quickly than they are the positives. So try to bear that in mind. The point I'm going for here is that in the moment, in the room, with a room full of people, I watched this person start to be a bit incensed. I told this individual they had a very ugly baby and they were not going to respond well. And there's two perspectives there. The salesperson would say, "Oh, this is not good. We're not going to be able to, get additional business from this person." From my perspective, it was that I was losing credibility by the second in front of this person because my perspective differed from theirs. And well, my own ego doesn't allow that, right? So, again, trying to save that process, I think, is a very critical skill.
Yeah, and adaptability and thinking on your feet and being able to react to those changes in the environment without having a heads up. How do you screen for something like that when you're interviewing people? How do you determine whether or not they have, one, that critical thinking ability, and two, the ability to adapt on the fly and figure it out, even if they're kind of taken aback by something?
I try to feel it out in the moment, but there's a lot of times with a client, or I'm sorry, with a candidate, where I'm going to give them a story or a scenario based on what they have said their experience is. Right? If they've said, we have to, we're a SOC analyst. they're a SOC analyst and they have to present to a client, here's my findings from today, and here's my recommended course of action, so on and so forth. I'll ask, what do you do if a client pushes back and says that your finding is not accurate? And then I gauge very carefully how the person responds. If they're stumbling over their words, if they're not sure how to respond, if they don't have an answer, I will factor that in. But it's the people that think on their feet and say, well, I would ask, why do they think it's inaccurate? Or I would engage them in a dialogue, a conversation to unpack some of, what they think the source of that dissonance is. That's the person I want to talk to again. I want to explore that. I want to pull on that thread a little bit. And I kind of want to see it in action. It's one thing to say you can do it in an interview, but when you're in the middle of a dialogue with a client who's, ostensibly pretty unhappy with you and what you're doing in that moment, how are you going to react? Right? Are you on the back foot or are you prepared? Are you ready to dance with this person?
Yeah, and I would imagine leading up to that point, it's almost like you kind of want to take somebody off guard in the interview, because that's what would happen in real life. It's like a practice run, but then you also have to worry about, I guess, freaking out the candidate too much to where they're no longer interested in the company or they get a bad impression. And I would imagine there's probably got to be some rapport building on the front end to make that okay in the long run. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I'm never going to yell at somebody. I'm never going to do the, get in somebody's face in an interview process. It's going to be as calm and as diplomatic as possible, for all the reasons you just stated. But also because I'm of the mind that folks will return your demeanor. If you're calm, if you're collected, if you're reasonable in the conversation, whoever it is you're interacting with will be inclined to be as well. And so not only do I want to conduct myself that way because I believe in that strategy as a strategy, but one of two things is going to happen. They're going to pick up on that and they're going to reflect that demeanor, or they're going to be off-put by it. And that's also a finding for me.
Yeah, that's great how you put finding instead of red flag. So obviously You're very practiced in doing this, working with clients. What about the relationship and working with recruiters, whether internal or external to your organization? Obviously, you've done some hiring. How has that relationship been? And could you think of some good things that have happened, some bad things that have happened, maybe some areas for improvement?
Yeah, in general terms, I've never had a really bad experience with a recruiter, internal or otherwise. I do genuinely feel like recruiters, and I'm preaching to the choir. I genuinely feel like recruiters also have it fairly difficult, especially when they're trying to find that needle in a haystack, like we've talked about before. I did have an instance with a former organization, not Newspire, where I had sought out a candidate. Sorry, I'm going to mix those up repeatedly. I had sought out a candidate for my team based on a referral by somebody else. And I told her, put your application in through this process, but it's going to get routed to me. And, it's at this point, it's basically a formality, right? And so it went through the recruiting process. She went through the recruiting process, I should say. And a couple of weeks went by and I didn't see her resume cross my desk, or, metaphorical desk. And so I reached out to the recruiting team and a low-level member of the recruiting apparatus. And I'm not trying to be reductive when I say that. I just mean that they were the first line of weeding through hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes for the organization. I reached out and I said, hey, did you get a resume from this person? And recruiting responded and said, yes, we eliminated her. And I said, by what criteria? And they said, well, by our own criteria. I said, okay, all right. But what was your criteria? Like, help me understand how it is that this person got eliminated from the process. We just didn't think that she was a fit for the job. That's the wrong answer. If you can give me an answer, if you can talk me out of that person finding a role on my team, I'm all ears. Let's do that. But if you can't give me an answer, wrong. Now I'm definitely hiring her, right? Out of spite. You know what I mean? And so I was really, that one is going to stand out to me for a long time around I'm not trying to start throwing stones at recruiting, but realistically speaking, if we determined up front these were the criteria, and this person met enough of those criteria to make it at least make it to my inbox, why didn't this person make it to my inbox? But also, like, I'm the person hiring, right? I mean, realistically speaking, it should be okay for me to even wildly deviate from the initial criteria. Does that make sense? As long as it's not illegal for them to work for the organization, if there isn't a valid reason, listen, we literally cannot hire this person, then a conversation should have happened long before she was just, funneled off to the round bucket. So that was the one that stuck out to me. But over the years, I've never had, other than that, I've never had a super bad experience with recruiters. And I've always tried to recognize that I think a lot of folks don't see the delineation between a hiring manager and a recruiter, right? It's all the same amorphous blob of faceless individual. And so when we see, we have a tendency when we see those somewhat outlandish job descriptions, we think that those job descriptions are coming from the recruiter. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this recruiting team put together this job description. Like, it's just so absurd. That's not really reality in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, that information is coming directly from the hiring manager, directly from outside of the recruiting apparatus. And the recruiting apparatus, frankly, doesn't know better or is in a position where they're just going to forward it on and do what they do because they have so much else on their plate. And so my interactions with recruiting has always tried to be, I want to give the recruiter everything that they need to be successful in finding a person or persons for me to take the ball from there. I'm not looking for a recruiter to go through the entirety of the process and my hands are off and I just magically get somebody in front of me who checks all the boxes and I didn't have to do any effort in the process. I don't think that's fair either.
Yeah, it's interesting that situation that you had mentioned. I was thinking, do you know why that recruiter did end up rejecting that person? Did you ever get an answer to that? Or would you say it was a bias? Like, do you have a theory?
I don't even have a theory because I don't have enough information to formulate a theory I could commit to. It was enough. I immediately exited the entire thought process the minute they said, well, we just decided this person wasn't a fit. I stopped thinking about the reason after that. I was like, well, that's not good enough. And I hired her anyway. Like she had a spot on my team within days after that. And I reached out to the leader of the recruiting team and said, just like I mentioned previously, like if you have a reason not to hire somebody or to eliminate somebody from the pool, I am all ears. And listen, almost any reason is fair game, but it has to be a reason, not just we decided. No, I'm not okay with that.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of, in recruiting in general, documenting everything so you can provide evidence for your decisions. Best practice as a recruiter is to write down notes every time you talk to a candidate. That way, if there were any red flags, you can have that written down, have a record of it. And then if somebody asks, so I think organization and having everything documented, just the best practice in general. If it does become a legal issue, some things you shouldn't write down, I guess. we'll say it that way. But sure. Yeah, I think often there is room for a lot of biases in recruiting and hiring. We don't always have perfect information. I can say that, especially as an external recruiter, sometimes I'm not as close to the hiring manager as I would like to be, simply because I'm not within the same organization. But oftentimes us recruiters will get no feedback on a candidate and then have to kind of guess, what did that hiring manager really mean by that 2-word response or no response at all, Right. So I would just say in general, as a best practice to any hiring managers out there, the more information you give the recruiter, the better results you're going to get moving forward. Even if you're insulted that recruiter found you the worst person ever, you have to tell them something to help them refine their search and move in a different direction. Otherwise, it's just going to keep happening and it's going to, keep being a thorn in your side. So like you said, I think just spending some time as a hiring manager on the front end and ideally throughout the process to help recruiters understand what they're going for. Obviously, I understand that some factors are beyond your control. Like you can't control as a hiring manager the motivation level of the recruiter, the knowledge level of the recruiter to a certain degree. I mean, you can educate people to a certain degree, but if they don't come from a security recruiting background, you can't teach them security in a day. You can give them a crash course, but who knows how much is actually going to be absorbed. I often say that we're effective in what we do at InfoSec Connect because we're so specialized and we've been in security for so long. But then I'm also aware of the fact that sometimes years of experience can be a poor measure of somebody's ability to do something. So any thoughts on the years of experience way of measuring aptitude in a certain area?
I love the way you said that. Years of experience is not a guarantee. The presence of degrees is not a guarantee. The presence of certifications is not a guarantee. You still have to meet with those individuals. Yeah, I mean, I have some degree of bias because I have years of experience, and I have some thoughts on what that typically means to the industry, and how quickly you find yourself on the wrong side of a line in the eyes of the industry. But I think experience is important, but I want to see varied experience. I want to know what if somebody spent 20 years in the same role. Yes, it's 20 years of experience, but it's 20 years in the same role. I don't know that I can trust that person has the chops to do what it is that I would need them to do. That's not to say they couldn't. It's that I'd be a little more skeptical, right? So I'm looking at, what is it that you've been doing? The individual that I was just referring to, she had an entire career in adult education, higher education, not even close to related to information security. But because of my own proclivities that I like that we approach the relationship, not just with subordinates or even other members of our organization above us, but also clients as an opportunity to mentor, to learn and teach and exchange information in that way, I was very intrigued. I thought, well, that's fantastic. Those are the skill sets that I think would be, again, something I can put in front of a client. I was correct. She's fantastic in front of the client. She's been building her technical knowledge baseline ever since. So I'm looking for experience that is varied. I'm looking for experience that demonstrates an acumen of learning, of growing, etc. I do, the great debate of degrees and certifications. Do they mean anything? That varies from one person to the next. You pick two people. One person learned from the process, and the other one's super good at taking tests and just got the letters after their name. And you're not going to know that. You can't make a generality about everybody. You have to know that on an individual basis, which means you're going to have to interact with them. And in some cases, you're going to have to work with them. You're going to have to hire them and try to make them better as a professional and figure out, well, maybe this one isn't in the right place. Maybe they need to be doing something else, but this isn't it. And let's find what makes sense for that person.
Yeah, as human beings, we use heuristics to categorize people and experiences and everything. It's how we understand the world. But the flip side of that is that we can sometimes lump everybody into a same group that isn't necessarily the same, because that's been our experience, that everybody from that group previously has acted the same or had the same qualities. So like you said, you really need to treat each person like an individual. And I think far too much of what causes the talent gap is the fact that people aren't being treated as individuals. They're being treated as somebody who worked at a certain company or has that certain degree or has that certain certification. And that's all that's being considered versus the context around all of those things. What does it mean that they got that certification or got that degree? Somebody else might be doing all the YouTube learning and have their home lab, and that's how they learn versus going and taking tests. Every person is different. And, in general, I say we just all need to keep more of an open mind. And biases, I think, are a big part of why people don't get hired in the industry. We could go down that rabbit hole too. But I know you have some thoughts on that. I'll leave it up to you, I guess, Mike, whether or not you want to go down the bias rabbit hole.
I'll leave most of it alone in the interest of self-preservation. But I do think that biases exist, and I think it's important for each of us to recognize when we're leaning into a bias. I met with somebody yesterday that I knew going into the interview, the panel style interview, that I was cognizant of the fact that there was at least one other person on the panel that I thought was going to be a bit anxious or a bit nervous about this person, right? That they're going to be walking on eggshells during the interview process, the interviewer, not the candidate. And I was thinking to myself, how is that going to affect the way I interview this person or the decision that I make as to whether or not to recommend this person for hire? And I had to consciously, convince myself. I had to tell myself, like, it doesn't matter. That panelist is not me. That panelist's decision is not going to affect my decision. And moreover, that panelist's biases shouldn't be my biases automatically. So, and it turned out the candidate was fantastic besides. But at any rate, knowing when it's your bias in the way is also a very critical skill that I think more people should develop.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of brings up a point that I think people are poor at in general. It's just self-reflection, reflection on a company's interview process, on their criteria for evaluating candidates. I think, especially in security, it seems like everybody's so busy and stretched so thin. It's so difficult to just kind of step away and evaluate how things are going. Do you do that purposefully, I guess, kind of step aside and just self-reflect or reflect on the job and the business? Do you make that a point to do, or is it something that just kind of occurs naturally for you?
Oh, it's not natural. It is a forced behavior. It may not seem like it, but I am a bit of an introvert. I lean more introvert than I do extrovert. I like to refer to myself as an ambivert, but that's largely a sales pitch where I'm convincing myself as much as anybody else. But so I always try to be conscious of, if as I look at the industry and I formulate an opinion, especially if it's a little bit cynical, is it me or is it the industry? Is it me or is it the interaction I just had with somebody or something I just read or, whatever the case may be? Is it, am I interpreting this incorrectly? What's the other side of the coin here? And, again, it isn't necessarily an age thing, but it is, I think, a perspective thing, in that I always try to evaluate, there's three sides to every story: yours, theirs, and the truth. And do I have enough information? Again, do I have enough information to formulate an opinion that I would commit to? And if I don't, one of two things has to happen. I need more information, or I don't hold an opinion. I'm not going to express an opinion on a particular thing. And I think that's okay. It's okay not to have an opinion. It's okay not to have a strong perspective on a thing. And I think that applies to the industry as well. There's a lot of punditry around, pick a thing, CMMC compliance to AI to,
SEC.
whatever the latest, the SEC, whatever the latest, compromise is. This week, as we record this, the news that Okta kind of fibbed about the amount of data that was breached. They called it 1%. Turns out it was 100%. That's just a minor rounding error. There's a lot of punditry around that sort of thing, and there's perception of value in that punditry in terms of share of voice and so on and so forth. But for my own individual sense of identity, I can't bring myself to do it again without having enough information to formulate an opinion. And I always try to be open to, if somebody else comes in and says, well, you kind of missed this part of the story, and if it completely and radically changes my view of the thing, I'll cop to that. Geez, I did miss that. I was wrong. I am so sorry.
Yeah, it's funny. It seems like in our culture today, people are extremely convinced that their position is correct, regardless of how much evidence they may have to support that position. And I think that sometimes trickles down to hiring and mentoring and managing people as well. Mm-hmm. What do you do when, you have a subordinate that has a good idea, that maybe you haven't thought of before? How do you address that in recognizing the validity or the importance of that idea without, I guess, undermining your ability to manage the group? Because I feel like some people kind of see good ideas as a threat to themselves if it comes from somebody beneath them, so to speak, in the hierarchy. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I mean this with the utmost sincerity. I've never felt that way. I've always it's akin to those folks who are either early on in their IT career or don't have the healthiest view of it, right? That if I share information, I must know everything about this thing, because if I share that information, I lose job security. And I feel exactly the opposite. As soon as you are holding all the cards and you're playing everything close to the vest, you're a threat to the organization. You're a risk to the organization. And the organization should rightfully respond immediately to either adjust your behavior or, redirect your career. I feel the same way about subordinates. If somebody comes to me with a fantastic idea, I want to be swift in recognizing, number one, it was a fantastic idea and it's theirs, right? Let's follow this through. I'm kind of the mind that if I recognize a subordinate and that results in the organization I'm working for either holding that against me or holding me back in some fashion, that should be a clear sign to me to find the exit. That's not healthy from above, right? And so if somebody comes with a good idea, somebody is doing a good job, I think that needs to be recognized early, often, and clearly with the credit where it belongs.
Yeah, I think that's a good differentiator between leaders and managers, and people that care about their people and maybe don't have a narcissistic or authoritarian management style. I think certain people are just more naturally able to recognize talent and lift other people up. Not everybody functions that way, obviously, but certainly a best practice. We're coming up on time here, Mike. Just one last question for you. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Gosh, I had so many other questions I was prepared for than that one. What are we not talking about? We're talking about a lot of things. It's the basics for me. I'm going to go operational on you. I use the hashtag back to basics a lot on LinkedIn and in conversations with clients and stuff, that we have a tendency to look at the shiny new vulnerability or the shiny new attack chain. And meanwhile, we're doing almost nothing or not paying enough attention to the basics, right? And so, I would strongly advocate for that as practitioners, as professionals, as stewards of the industry, we should be espousing that. What are you doing with least privilege? I know it's not sexy. I know it's not, a common conversation in the news right now, but if you do least privilege right, man, you're so much further ahead than a lot of organizations that are not. So, and that's one thing. Now, we'll conquer that. Now let's talk about something else, right? Let's talk about something as wild as, asset inventory. Also not sexy, also super critical. So I think that's the thing that I think we need to bring up to the surface again, is just good basic hygiene, basic risk management and information security hygiene across the board.
Yeah, and with belts being tightened across the board these days, no better time than to focus on the fundamentals and do what you can with less. So, it's a great point, Mike. We'll appreciate your time. If people want to find you online, I'm assuming LinkedIn. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
I would say LinkedIn is a great place. Pretty easy to find, a relatively unique name, not a whole lot of us out there. But linkedin.com/in/M Pedrick will get you there, or should get you there. And then also you can find a lot of me at newspire.com, a lot of articles and other content You should check out newspire.com anyway.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Mike. Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.